Unmute. Start video. Hello. Hi, Maureen. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. You're sort of squeaky. Hi, Brenda.
Hello.
I don't know. Yeah, I can hear you, but something is odd. Let me see. You know what? I think maybe my problem is.
From Toronto. I'm speaking from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Toronto is the site of violent colonial history, and we recognize the oppression and activism of Indigenous peoples and join in solidarity with Indigenous land and water defenders. I want to give some personal thanks to Brick Books and the people who staff it, Elena Muntz, Kitty Lewis, my editor, John Barton, and to Brenda Leafso, who has so capably organized this online launch, and to Jane for including me here this evening. Before I read, I just want to also encourage you all to buy books and to buy books tonight. Of course, you can order them from the Brick Books website, but there are many independent bookstores that you can order from. Many of them are doing delivery or curbside pickup or mail order. And I'm just going to mention 3 or 4 of them in Toronto. Book City has 3 locations still open, delivering. Another Story in the West End. Queen Books in the East End. Type Books has 3 locations. And of course, Canada's only all poetry bookstore, Knife Fork Books. So just that little plug. So I'm going to start with reading the title poem from the book Sotto Voce with its beautiful cover. Let's see, can you see it? Sotto Voce is a theater or opera term instructing an actor or singer to lower his or her voice and speak directly to the audience and tell the truth about the shenanigans going on behind him or her on stage. So sometimes I need to define it, sometimes I don't need to. This particular poem I wrote after seeing The Whisper Opera, an opera by David Lang, in which the singers sang in a whisper, if you can imagine. And finally, I want to say the poem incorporates a few quotes from Jack Spicer. Sotto voce. When you whisper everything, when even your saxophone whispers its notes, when you just graze your fingertips across the drum skin for a drumly quietness, or the words on your sheet lower their volume to minimal, when you forswear aloud for the everyday language of small rivers, today the dawn is open, free-flowing and black, not closed and frozen white. When the scratchy hushes under the thickening ice become fainter and fainter, when you whisper everything, vows and regrets, sweet nothings and morsels of shame, or just the abundant mundanities of your life, listeners strain to catch your watery drift. They follow your eyes. Your breath is a hand resting on a baby's naked chest. After the breath stops, Spicer says the words, listen. At the end of the evening's whispering, an old neighbor said all she could hear was the eulogy for my mother from 30 years ago. You were always hearing your own, all the way down past the future, louder and more audible than murmurs that go swimming past you as if they were blue fish. And the next poem I'll read. This is a book that plays with issues of quietness and loudness. So this is another one dealing with quietness. And it draws on the work of both Frank O'Hara and Toronto poet Margaret Christakos for both content and form. Inside my quietness. Inside my quietness is a breath caught in fear. Inside my breath is a warmth, licking the hard forsythia buds yellow. Within the 4 spiked blossoms are a long sleep and an abundant hunger, and inside any hunger is a woman, or rather any woman contains many hungers. Inside all our fears is a reality both twisted and true. Art lives beside fear, fear of falling short or overstating, fear of offending. But courage beckons others to attend. I haven't mentioned the sorrow inside quietness, which tries to shrink but stays huge. Even larger is the sleeping body that breathes the world alive. I especially wanted to read that poem because it mentions forsythia, which are just starting to bloom in Toronto. So I know you're well ahead of us out there on the West Coast, but it's a particular delight for us this week. And finally, a poem called Speak Now. Speak now into the metal mesh. Jiggle the puzzle till the parts fall to the floor. Drag the presidents out for a share of the pain. Roll the dice and scoop the children out of their sandy shoreline graves. Every era sails the coffin ships. How many can the fiberglass boats hold before they crack in two? Mercy is failing. The GPS is failing. Speak now. Thanks very much.
Oh, lovely.
Thank you. So I think it's over to you, Jane.
Well, I think Brenda is first. But
Oh,
I think
yeah,
Brenda
right.
was going to. Well, thank you, Maureen. That was such a lovely reading.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So
Sorry
yes,
for people
thank
who
you,
are
Maureen.
asking me to say the page numbers. I couldn't read the chat. I'm sorry.
Well, you could offer them now.
Okay.
And then I've actually just, maybe Elena or Kitty, I don't have the books with me in this room, but maybe you could offer the pages in the chat window as Jane reads. But without further ado, welcome to Jane Munro and the launch of Glass Float, which is her 7th poetry collection following Blue Sonoma with Brick Books, which won the 2015 Griffin Poetry Prize. Jane is a member of the collaborative poetry group Yoko's Dogs. She's been a professor of creative writing at several universities in BC, has taught many informal writing workshops, and has read to poetry audiences across Canada. For more than 20 years, she has studied in Canada and India and practiced Iyengar yoga. And there is a video of her doing a headstand while reciting a poem on her book page on our website, so on the Glass Float book page. In 2012, she moved back to Vancouver, where she grew up and raised her children after spending 20 years living rurally on the coast of Vancouver Island. So without further ado, Jane, let us celebrate your book.
Well, thank you, Brenda. And thank you everyone for coming. It's so exciting to see you and see your names. And, I mean, hi, Mary.
I want to cheer.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll mute now.
You have to mute now, but it's really exciting to see you all, and I'm really touched to be reading to you. I will miss not being with you in person, but this new format does allow people from across the continent to be part of the evening. And I see that even a friend of mine in New Zealand has joined us. So it's amazing. Before I start, like Maureen, I would like to acknowledge that we are here in Vancouver on the land which is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And all that Maureen said about Toronto and being a city where there are many Indigenous people of different nations living and our appalling history, I would like to echo about Vancouver too. So I'm going to, and I also want to thank everyone at Brick Books, the whole wonderful team of you. It's been such a pleasure to work with you, including Brenda, who is hosting us tonight. I'm now going to read a set of 11 poems from Glass Float. That's, can you see, am I turning it right? That spanning the 3 sections in the book in the same order as they appear in the book. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm just going to read them. Afterwards, we will have time for discussion and your questions. The epigraph to Glass Float is a quote from an article in the Scientific American, The Puzzle of Conscious Experience, by David J. Chalmers, who said, "Conscious experience is at once the most familiar thing in the world and the most mysterious." Convexities. My grandfather taught me, when he gave me painting lessons, that there's no such thing as a concavity in nature. When you study the profile of a valley, it's made up of convexities. I saw this was true when I made contour drawings. Forbidden to glance down, my pencil moved as my eye did along a periphery. When I finished and looked at the paper, my drawing would be little hummocks, some longer, some shorter, linked together. My grandfather also said, art is suggestion. Art is not representation. Now I'm going to use some virtual backgrounds behind poems. So here we go. Glass Float. Our English word horizon derives from a Greek word meaning the bounding circle, our boundary, limit. A glass float, like a person, has boundaries. It's fragile. It's made to ride on the surface of ocean and hold up a fish net. This one came a long way from Japan to the coast of BC. Somehow it landed safely. It's reflective. You can see through it. But the outside looks different when viewed through or on its curves. There are flaws in the glass. It's handmade. Actually, mouth-made. Someone's breath formed it and is inside it. We can change what we make. Within what horizon we place the past. Whoops. Someone has, yeah, okay. Snow coming down the mountain. The bear carries her bulk on human hands. Her snout long, coat sleek, eyes attentive within and without. We both ate huckleberries. She didn't flinch when I fell into the creek. Could I have a life as a blue whale? Could my soul grow an elephant-sized tongue? Ocean yawns. Cities before the city surface. She walks in the sun. Steam rises as frost melts. Could I slide my fingers under her dark guard hairs, touch soft wool? In the back of my mind, a halo of her fur. Beneath the city, lost creek beds. The snow's butterflies dance. Relegatus. The bandages covering her arms and legs were stained yellow and sometimes bloody. A burn was open on her chest, yellow gash to the full thickness of the skin, red and purple about the edges. Her back was unbearable to look at when they rolled her from side to side, yellow and gray, gelled scabs starting to seal the tissue. Her huge belly, they had bloated her with fluids, like gaining a full-term pregnancy overnight, the burn doctor said, pumped like a bellows. And the little breasts that folded over the top of that rising and falling tummy looked like the points of a collar. Sometimes I slipped into a light trance, almost sleep, and dreamt of whales, of those accidents when a great creature is stranded ashore and dies on the sand, with a crowd of diminutive humans gathering, helpless to save the Leviathan. The nurses knew exactly what was going on and what my mother needed. One explained why a reading on the screen was wrong, got rid of the inaccurate instrument, inserted a new line into a different vein, hard to find a usable vein, and hooked up another monitor. "Are you enjoying your life?" my mother asked her. "Yes," the nurse replied, taking a deep breath. "I am. The most important thing is to enjoy being alive." One day I congratulated her. "Mum, you're buffaloing the doctors and nurse by healing so well." She looked at me, pursed her lips, and said, "Relegatus." "What?" "Relegatus," she repeated. "I don't know if that's a word, but it means it's entirely up to the individual." The swiftness of what's wordless. Creek. Plunges in curtains. Beaded. Shimmering. Spray on salal leaves. Before the others wake the day my sister is born, my father's friend takes us to see the eagles. bluff, dry moss, dry peels of bark under arbutus. Behind us, the forest we climbed through. Below us, ocean. Eagle glides in a slow circle, dives, strikes a wave, skims the surface, then rises. In its talons, a fish. Above my mother's grave, in which we place the urn of my father's ashes, swallows, each on its own trajectory, sweep high, loop, glide low. Complementary proteins. To feed his first grandchild when she was ready for more than mother's milk, BKS Iyengar washed his hands, then churned cooked rice and dal with his fingers until each grain was mixed and blended with all the others, making one integrated, digestible whole. He added ghee. She smiled with the first spoonful. This is how you feed a baby, he told Abby, his granddaughter, and the child's aunt. Abby tells you, that is what Guruji has done with his asanas. He's churned all aspects of yoga into one smooth whole to nourish you with all you need from the start. Sitting on the floor, listening to her lecture, you remember watching him work with her in the practice hall. Abby groaning, trying harder. Her grandfather's voice encouraging, warm, patient, never short-tempered, never shouting, morning after morning, tender. December 2, 2014. Gita's clues against depression. Number 1. Today, Gita tackles depression. Like a detective, she's been investigating it. Her father's death less than 4 months ago. Keep your eyes on the horizon, she begins. Widen the gaze to take in all your periphery. See it on a big screen across the back of the brain, as if it were projected on the inside of the skull. Notice you can still see the ground, everything, without strain. Immediately you're with her. You've learned by trial and error to do this to keep your balance. It works better than fixating on something in front of you, spotting. Gita goes on. If you wear multifocal glasses, take them off when walking around. They make you drop your chin to look at stairs or obstacles in your path. Draw your head back and let the neck rise up easily to support it. Lengthen the little muscles between the neck and the skull. Shine like a full moon without dispelling the dark. Did she really say that, you wonder, the last part? Possibly. Or what she said made you think of it. The moon is close to full. You saw it last night when you got up to pee. December 4, 2014. Although I said I wasn't going to say anything around these poems, I should explain, for those of you who don't know, there are probably many of you, that Gita is BKS Iyengar's daughter and also a yoga teacher in India at the Iyengar Yoga Center there. And these poems were written during her intensive, a 10-day intensive in December 2014. Gita's Clues Against Depression, number 3. When you're seated for pranayama, Gita offers another clue. Let your mind be in every cell of your body. Breathe into the dark places where you feel stuck. Yogis called the tailbone the small mind. You wonder why. Vestigial bone? Perhaps it's your monkey mind, switching, letting you hang from a branch, almost a fifth limb. Find it, she says. Light it up with your breath. Lift it and ask it what it's thinking. Let it talk for a while in its own language. Listen to your little toes, your fourth toes, armpits. Laugh at yourself, with yourself. Be a network, a community, a self made of many. Be a populous city of working cells. Delight in your multiplicity. Later in Shavasana, your mind following your breath, you begin to wonder how you know you are you. You discovered as a baby your mother wasn't you. If you didn't cry, she didn't know you were awake. Then an ongoing accumulation of vestigial selves, 6-year-old, 16-year-old. At times you catch their feelings, slick and squirming, pulled from the dark you float on. You recognize them, the way friends flash a look at each other, laugh together. Then one says something the other has felt, but may not say. December 4, 2014. At your back. Your boots are slipping on wet rock, but someone behind you holds you tight, lifts you. You climb effortlessly uphill, not quite carried. Don't know whose feet grip granite, whose legs move yours, whose arms support you. Maybe it's not a person. Maybe it's a cyclone. Foam tufts on branch tips, foam dunes on the beach below. Like a spider, like an octopus, like yoga. Maybe you have 8 limbs, 4 employed daily out in front, 4 harder to see. Propelled as if by wind, you don't count steps or breaths. December 11, 2014. And then from the final section, recycling. He lost his wedding ring when the power went out. No ring in pockets. No ring in drawers. This, the ring I found outside the Tate Gallery. It fit you, dear one, a ring someone lost. And the final poem in Glass Float. It's winter, the gods love, high and windswept, where rivers begin and snow whirls like Sarasvati circling Brahma, his lust, growing 5 faces to keep 10 eyes on her. But that comes after mountains, moon, sun, an ocean of stars, after darkness and light differ. In winter, the gods shed headgear and garlands, sandals and spears, limbs and vendettas. They shed names. Honed to weightlessness, they flare and drift, rise, buckle, fold, explode from a hierarchical operatic cast. The thinned mesh of their turning sparkles and floats, holds a delta's silt, lifts with snow geese, falls on peaks. Darkness in winter nights, ruthlessly itself. In winter days, light frayed through ice crystals dogs the sun before collecting again in moon's gaze. In winter, the gods make do without mirrors, nothing to fog with breath or wink back, and spin out of bounds, infatuated again, desiring their manifold relinquished parts. Thank you. There's glass float. So, Brenda?
Collective clapping is allowed at this point. Collective applause. Thank you so much, Jane, and keep your eye on that chat window there so you can see all the applauding and clapping.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. So I just wanted to say that Massey Books in Vancouver is one of those bookshops that is delivering and offering curbside pickup in the Vancouver area, and they have been very generous in helping us set this up and selling books for Jane, and had initially we're going to sell the books at Jane's in-person launch. So if you are in the Vancouver area and don't have a copy of Jane's book and would like one, then Massey Books is the way to go there. If you are in the Vancouver or Victoria area, Munro's have copies of Jane's book as well, because she was supposed to read there. So they
with
are
Arlene.
also offering delivery with Arlene.
Yeah.
And I would say that Maureen's book is also available at Massey Books. And otherwise, Toronto area, Maureen listed a few, another storybook shop, Queen Street Books, Type Books. I'm missing a few, Maureen. But at this point, if you have a question or a comment either for Jane or Maureen, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it, or say it in the chat window and I'll read it out loud.
Just write something.
I don't know. This is Leslie in Victoria. I don't know how to do the chat window.
So
Can you unmute yourself? Can you turn on your video and look down in the left-hand corner of your screen, and it should have a little image of the video camera. And if you click on the up arrow beside it, it should allow you to turn it on.
Oh, thank you.
I can hear you.
Ah, oh, there's Susan.
James, Fiona Lamb would like to know more about how meditation and yoga inspired the book.
Oh, thank you, Fiona. Well, yoga and writing are both practices for me that I've carried on for a long time. And I like the fact that in yoga, in Iyengar yoga, Guruji, BKS Iyengar, told us that in yoga we were to bring intelligence to every cell of the body. And I think this is the same challenge in writing, that in trying to work to compose whatever it is, poetry or prose, the challenge is to bring intelligence to every word and punctuation mark and space. And so I think that the art of writing and the art of yoga are similar in their practices. One complements the other.
Next question from the chat is from Catherine Hobbs. Jane, the format seems particularly intimate, paradoxically perhaps. Fits your minimalism well. Did it strike you that way?
Oh, thank you, Catherine. Maybe that's even more minimalist by my choosing to read just a few poems from the whole sweep of the book. I actually thought when I was writing it that it was less minimalist than Blue Sonoma, but maybe I'm wrong. But I think it does strike me as, well, I say in the first poem that my grandfather said, art is suggestion, art is not representation. And that does seem true to me.
Hi, it's Lorna. I don't have a question. I just want to say it's my first virtual book launch reading, and I thought you two did brilliantly. I'm so pleased to have been part of this. Both of your sets of poems were extremely moving and touched me in every places that poems should touch. Great to take this on. Thank you, Brick Books. And thank you, Maureen and Jane. And Jane, I'm super impressed that you have backgrounds.
Well, the backgrounds were actually
we're of the same
easier.
generation, and you're so techno savvy that you have backgrounds. It's just been a delightful experience, and I just want to congratulate both of you and Brick Books for setting this up. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Lorna. Thank you.
I want to say thanks too.
There is a few more questions here. And if you're listening and you have a question, feel free just to type in. Leslie's iPad, unless you have a question, could you mute yourself? The next question is from LM McGinnis. How do you decide what words to leave out and what to let the reader infer?
Wow. I don't know that I think of leaving out the words. I think of putting in the essential words and removing those that aren't really needed, if that makes any sense. So I think I assume that the reader will be intelligent and have, well, actually, what I do think is that poetry is an architecture for the imagination and for the reader's imagination. And so it's like building a room or a house or an apartment block or whatever that other people will inhabit. And so if the structure is sound and the spaces are open, people have the ability to come in and furnish it with their own imaginations and memories. And I move in. And that's what I hope people will do with my poems, that they will make them their own and move into them. That may be rather optimistic, but anyway, that's how I decide what should be in and not.
Another question here from Adrian Robneys. Hi, Jane. I have read the book and congratulate you on making such beautiful work. Some of the poems that especially moved me were Receive Your Faith, Durga, It's Winter the Gods Love, and Half a Hero. In the latter, there is a line, you wonder what counts as courage today. Maybe wonder what challenges you faced writing this collection and what counts as courage in our changed circumstances now. Is there any connection between the two? And, this is a long one, also I noticed in the book you grapple with the concept of empire and the impacts of colonialism. Could you comment on the thread running through the book?
Wow. Adrian, thank you. Thank you for reading and thinking about the book. And also thank you for mentioning poems that I didn't read. It was hard to figure out what to read, so I just chose one particular set of poems, but there are certainly others. About courage, you ask what courage it took to write the book. Well, it was a challenge to write anything for me after Blue Sonoma. And it wasn't just Blue Sonoma, it was that my whole life had changed. I had left Point No Point, sold the property, sold the house. And then my husband had been in care and died. And I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment after living on 12 acres. And it was, and back in the city, which I was glad to be. It's where I need to be at this point. But it was quite a challenge just to write. And so I started writing these short narrative pieces that I could write in my journals. And that's what the poems from the yoga intensive were first. They were short narrative poems in my journals written basically on the spot. And it took courage to figure out that they were actually poems and not just my writing exercises, and that this kind of poetry was part of me. And as Gita said, rejoice in your multiplicity. You know, that to get through depression, one of the ways to get through depression is to accept all of the different parts of yourself and listen to them. And so that took some courage to do that. And you also ask about colonialism or empire. Coming back to Vancouver, I was particularly struck again by colonialism and empire, both the benefits to me of empire. I have lived a very privileged life. I've had opportunities that most women in the world in history and today never have. And I think that my position of privilege is partly because I come from a settler background and have grown up with privilege of, even though there were lots of times in my family when we weren't particularly wealthy and everything didn't always go swimmingly. But I think that during the time that I was working on Glass Float, I took a course at Emily Carr called Decolonial Aesthetics, and that gave me the chance to meet and see the work of a number of Indigenous artists. I audited that course again the second time it was offered and saw a different set. And this has begun to educate me some in decolonial aesthetics, but I think I have a long way yet to go. I don't know if that answers your questions, Adrian, but there.
A comment from Susan Glickman. But I also remember Guruji telling us, how do you expect to control your mind if you can't even control your needs? There are so many lovely comments and chats in here, Jane. I'm saving the chat and we'll figure out a way to forward it to you. From Shauna Butterwick, love the concept of poems being the architecture into which the reader can move into. How does reading the poems and our listening to you reading shape the occupation of the poetic structure?
Well, I think poems are also music. They're a form of music. And so when I am composing and reading, I work on them aloud. And I need to be able to hear the music of the poem and feel the rhythm and pattern and musical pattern of it. And so music is also an architecture for the imagination of the listener, if that helps. I think art is generally. Does that help, Shauna?
Can I mention something? This is Susan here.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. Speaking of the architecture, creating a structure into which you can move was a perfect, that resonated with me with the poem about your mother.
Uh-huh.
Because I knew her.
Yes.
And it was just like I was brought right to her bedside. And it was so powerful, Jane, I can't even tell you. Mm-hmm. And it was just a remarkable piece for me to hear, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Susan. You were in that house many times. The house behind that poem was the house that burned down, that she suffered terrible, terrible burns in that house fire. Susan, I can't.
Oh, I'm just saying that it was a marvelous piece of work that you constructed there with your architecture.
Thank you.
One more question in the chat window is from Fiona. It says, what makes a poem more?
Sorry, I'm didn't hear what you asked.
From Fiona, what makes a poem more than an exercise?
Well, that's a good question, Fiona. I think it has to work in some ways for me as an architecture for my imagination and my thoughts and feelings. And I think it's just something to do with the resonances that I feel collecting in it, and how, whether it works for me. It's an intuitive thing, I think. Maybe it's a matter of doing a lot of writing. I do a lot of exercises. I use my notebooks for drafting poems. And then after I've forgotten what is in my notebooks, I go back and look at them and tag things that still interest me in those draft pieces. And then I start working from those pieces that, after I have forgotten about them, still interest me. So it takes a while for me, usually, for a poem to surface out of the exercises. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, that's
One
great.
more
Thanks
from-
so much. Thank you.
Just one more from Susan. Question for Maureen and Jane. At what point in an experience of writing do you realize a poem is forming?
Maureen, why don't you start?
Found my unmute. For me, it's a bodily thing. I can feel a kind of urgency in my gut. I can feel a sense of sort of potentiality. This is something that could turn into a poem. It's not so explicit, but it is a bodily thing. And, you know, in terms of what Jane was talking about, exercises, I can do an exercise, you know, just follow a prompt that has been given to me or that I kind of ferreted out of another person's poems. And sometimes in doing that, I will think this is a dud, this is not worth pursuing. And other times I'll think, there's something here that I need to go further and further and further into. So that's sort of the way it is for me.
I think that's very similar to how I feel too, Maureen. It's definitely bodily. I mean, I think of it as a visceral click, you know, and my gut tells me, yeah, this is something I'm going to work on. I want to work on. And sometimes it will wake me up and I'll think, oh, can't go back to sleep. I have to do something about that. But often for me, the exercise starts with dream. And for many years, I made notes of dreams when I first woke up, and then would sit there and listen with my notebook to what was starting to form and draft a poem in the notebook from the prompt of that dream. Sidney is appeared on the screen. Anyway, so I think otherwise my answer is very similar to yours, Maureen. It often takes a long time, and sometimes every now and then something will come more quickly, but that's very rare for me.
Well, that comes to the end of the questions in the chat window. If anyone else wants to say something verbally through your audio to Jane or Maureen, now is your chance. Otherwise, Jane and Maureen, feel free to say your goodbyes.
Jane, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So lovely to see your face again. And I've left a note saying that such wonderful memories of that house and our own life so many years ago, but you always take me on a grand adventure.
Thank you, Diane.
Internally and externally. Love you a bunch.
Thank you, Diane. It's so good to see you.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Jane, it's Jenny.
Oh, Jenny, hi.
Just want to congratulate you on your book, and it's just wonderful to hear you talk about it. It's really inspiring.
Thank you, Jenny.
Have a good one. Stay safe.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. And I just appreciate it so much. It is, thanks again to Brick for organizing this, and Brenda for hosting it, and Maureen for reading with me and sharing this with me. And thank you so much to each of you who has come, and just want to say namaste. Take care.
My thanks to all of you. It's lovely to have a happy evening in the midst of this pandemic. It's just a treat.
Very lovely.
And thank you, Brenda, and thank you all the folks at Brick Books.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.